All right. So the topic of today's workshop presentation is the inclusion movement. All right. And let me hit present. We're going to get this a little bit larger. And so it's a teacher's guide, Google Slides presentation. So the inclusion movement basically describes a special needs student's right to participate with non-disabled students. So it's their right to participate in activities and in the general education classroom because years ago they weren't allowed to. And in fact, there's a we'll go over the history of special needs students and how they were excluded at one point from learning with regular education students. But we'll get to all of this. This is a good topic here. So first, here's a video. It's a shorter video. It's just a brief overview. Okay, just I think I titled it overview of the inclusion movement. I'll provide a link. I'll provide a link above if you want to view this. But this presentation is going to get into a little bit more detail. So the inclusion movement, when special needs students are included with non-disabled peers, there's a lot of benefits, and we're going to go over all of them, such as they have better self-esteem, and as somebody who spent years as a special education teacher, one of the saddest things that I realize is the low self-esteem that many special needs students have, and that comes from being labeled as special ed. That's the that's something that I always think about, and I always hear students, special needs students, always say that, oh, I'm dumb, I get laughed at for being here. It's terrible. But let's get it going here. So the benefits, right? So there are numerous benefits of inclusion classrooms for special needs students. These students, when they're in an inclusion setting, they report having more positive peer interactions. Okay, these students often get to work in small groups. The students themselves can even manage group activities, and there should be limited involvement from adults. So when special needs students are in a general education classroom or something like that, or maybe participating in a sport with non-disabled students, adults shouldn't be hovering around them and let these children they just want to fit in. They just want to be normal. Okay, they want to be treated the same. Special needs students will likely develop improved communication skills. Effective communication is needed to plan, organize, and lead others, right? So again, the goal of education is to prepare these students for life or when they leave the school, okay? And it's beneficial for special needs students to be, to be mainstreamed. IEP outcomes of special needs students are reportedly met at higher rates in inclusion classroom settings, both short-term and long-term goals. So, we're just going over the positives here of the inclusion movement and inclusion classrooms. When special needs students are introduced into the general education classroom with their non-disabled peers, they also have gains in social skills and career readiness development. Social skills are very important, especially with what's going on now with mental health due to the pandemic and things like that. Social emotional learning has become very, very prominent in education. So, these are all the good things. Placing special needs students in an inclusion setting leads to an increased level of self-esteem. That's something I was talking about before. Just from years of working in special education, it's the saddest thing is the low self-esteem that many of these students have. These children often report feeling stigmatized and pull out replacement resource rooms, self-contained rooms. When you take special needs students and you put them in self-contained rooms or out-of-district settings, they do feel stigmatized. They feel ostracized, and like I said, I see it myself. These students are at a higher risk of being bullied than non-disabled peers as well. So let's talk about the history, right? So we talked about some of the benefits of inclusion, and let's talk about how we got here. So, in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, disabled children, special needs students, students with disabilities, just children, let's say, with disabilities, most of them didn't get an education. Okay, only if they had a lot of money and they were able to pay a private tutor. Think of the Helen Keller story. She had like her own sort of like private tutor. Isolated schools began to rise in the 1850s. Isolated schools for special needs students, but again, these schools were nowhere near as good as your regular schools for non-disabled children. And then in the 1920s, special needs students were kind of, they were integrated into public schools, but they were kept separate. They were in a separate classroom. Okay, and then a lot of laws started to take place, and we have to give credit to parents and parent advocacy groups, because they really put the pressure on state legislators and the federal government and things like that to push these federal laws into to put these laws like IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disability Education Act, in place, and from that became the least restrictive environment, which we'll get to. Whereas where now special needs students have access to a general education curriculum, and that started like in the 1970s, 1975, I think it says here was IDEA. So let's see the history, right? It was a long journey to get to the point where we are today. A very long journey in the inclusion movement. All right, education has not always been kind to special needs students. In the early 1800s, there was no place for disabled students. And most special needs students didn't receive any education in terms of formal schooling. Some parents had to pay high sums of money for private tutoring. This is a great video. It's very short here. I go over in this video. I go over everything with the history of special education, and it starts from the early 1800s, working its way to, and I give a lot of credit to the parent advocacy groups, because they deserve it. So I'll put a link up here if you want to see that. The history of the inclusion movement. In the 1850s, special needs students started finding education by forming their own isolated schools. These schools were nowhere near the quality of regular education schools that were around at the time. In fact, many of these schools were terrible, prison-like conditions. Okay, these schools were not nice. During the 1920s, special needs students were making their place in regular schools. However, they weren't allowed to be in the same classroom with regular education students. They were kept separated from their non-disabled peers. And now looking back now, we could see the wrongs. In 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Student Act was passed. Some refer to this law as the foundation or the backbone for special education law. The law provides funds and special services, and also ensures a fair and appropriate treatment for special needs children. The act was later revised to the IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, 1990, wherein special needs students are given the right to access general education curriculum. And IDEA has been revised and improved over the years, which is what we want to do, right? We want to continue to improve. The inclusion beliefs, okay? The inclusion movement is based on the philosophy that special needs students belong in the general education classroom, that special needs students should belong with all the other children, okay? They have that right. The inclusion movement beliefs. The inclusion movement is based on the advocates for special education argue that it is inherently wrong to deny special education students that right, and I agree with them. Everybody deserves the right to belong. Human beings, children, they're social creatures. Okay, I always think back to, think back to when you were a child. How sometimes when I was a little kid, I used to go to the basketball park and they would have games, and I wanted to play and I was too young and they wouldn't pick me and I would have to watch, and I'm looking at this little guy here, and everybody wants to belong. Educators recognize that the quality of education is different in the general education classroom compared to the resource room. In general education classroom, students are higher achievers, and the classroom teachers set higher standards for them. That's the reality. Okay, that's the reality. You can always go back and think about Brown versus the Board of Ed. If a special needs student is in an inclusion classroom, it's necessary of the school to provide proper supports for the child. Okay, and schools do a good job. We're doing that now. For example, most inclusion classrooms have a special education teacher present to support the special needs students. Special needs students should be provided with safety and security in classroom environments. Most disabled children have serious medical issues. These issues should be addressed immediately. Other types of safety include bullying by their peers. I hate bullying. You got to keep an eye out for that. If you're an educator, principal, whatever you are, don't let that happen. Not on your watch. So again, right? They're providing safety is always the goal. Okay, so these special needs students are going to go into the general education classrooms, but safety first here, and emotional safety and things like that. All right, so mainstreaming, which is a very closely related to inclusion, almost the same thing here. Mainstreaming refers to like a student's readiness. Are they ready to participate in the general education classroom? And inclusion is the right of the special needs student to participate in the general education classroom. This is just a little bit of semantics here, but I get asked this question a lot. So both the terms mainstreaming and inclusion are closely related, but meanings a little bit different. Mainstreaming applies to the readiness to enter the general education classroom, and inclusion describes the right to participate, as I just mentioned that here. Okay, so a mainstream classroom is a general education classroom. Inclusion classes take place when the general education teacher also has some students receiving special education. Intervention and IEP teams will determine when a student is ready to be mainstreamed. Okay, so if a student is in a resource room, when are they ready to go? Okay, so inclusion is they have a right to go there, but are they ready? Is it the best place for them? So just because they have a right doesn't mean that all special needs students are going to be in the general education classroom, because if you take that student, a special needs students, and put them in that classroom and set them up for failure, that's the problem. So they have to be ready for it. Okay, you can't just put them in there. Inclusion classrooms earn their names because special needs students within that class are using their right to participate with non-disabled general education students. So that's kind of where the name comes from. Classification. So there's two types: partial inclusion and full inclusion. So special needs students are educated in a regular class most of the day. So if it's most of the day they're in regular ed, it's partial inclusion. And special needs students, if they're with their special needs students are always with non-disabled peers, then it's full. So that's the difference. Partial is like maybe just one resource room, and the rest is general ed, whereas full inclusion is all general ed and all with non-disabled peers. Okay, so I think we went over that. Yeah, you'll find that in many schools today, special needs students may have one or two classes where they're pulled out of to work with a specialist. That could be the reading specialist or things like that. That would also be like a partial. Some students spend a portion of their day in an all special education classroom with special needs students. That'd be like a I'm not sure if it would be called maybe not a pull-out. I forget the word of it, but there's a special name for a room where students stay in that room. So where special needs students are in the same room with the same teacher all day. It's not a pull-out replacement, and it's not a resource room. But that's another example. All right, so on the other hand, in a full inclusion setting, special needs students are always educated with their non-disabled peers. In this case, there are no pull-out replacement classes or anything like that. It's always in the general education room. And remember, that might not be the best fit. That might not always be the best fit for the student. All right, so instruction here. Let's talk about instruction in the inclusion classroom. Okay, so you'll see goals, pre-teach, reteach, functional skills, things like that. So here's a video that will outline several different teaching strategies for special needs students. Okay, I'll provide a link as well. It's a short video, I think about 2-3 minutes if you want to look that up. All right, so instruction. So how should instruction take place in the inclusion classroom? Well, it's best to vary the types of presentation. And when I say vary types of presentation, it shouldn't just always just be reading from the book. Mix it up, do different visuals. Students respond in different ways to different types of presentations. Varying type of presentation is different than learning styles. I want to say something too. There's a lot of research that learning styles have been debunked. So when I say varying the type of presentation, I don't just mean audio and visual and things like that. It's more than that. If you think of a science classroom, you could read from the book, you could do a PowerPoint, you could write on a board, you could ask questions. It's mannerism, it's things like that. It's not varying presentation isn't just audio, visual, things like that. That's part of it too, though, but it's a little bit more than that. Functional skills should be integrated into the curriculum, and this is for sort of like for severely disabled students. Functional skills are designed to prepare students for living on their own after they graduate from school. Different students will be on different academic levels in the classroom. Therefore, supplemental materials will probably be necessary to help them meet their goals. Some examples of supplemental materials include science models, calculators, accessibility tools, Chromebooks. Okay, so functional skills, that's for the more severely disabled. That's for helping prepare students for living on their own. And then, when in the classroom, we want to provide supplementary materials to them to help them out. That's like modifications. A lot of modifications are provide students with extra calculators, models, things like that. So, special needs students may not understand the content as quickly as the general education students. Teachers may have to pre-teach and reteach the lesson material. It's recommended that teachers set individual goals for the students. Okay, remember, it's similar to differentiated instruction. Okay, not all students are going to be in the same level. Special needs students are probably going to struggle a little bit more. Educators shouldn't expect equal outcomes. They shouldn't, because special needs students have a learning disability. How can you expect them to achieve at the same level as a non-disabled student? It doesn't make sense. So as these students have disabilities, those are the obstacles in their way. So, modifications and accommodations are to help these students overcome these obstacles. That's the point of having modifications and accommodations. And here's, again, a little short video just showing the difference of the two. Accommodation and modifications are what makes special education students successful in an inclusion classroom, right? We want to give them that little extra support, right? We talked about, supplemental resources. General education teachers usually provide a study guide, and then special education teacher highlights the important topics and ideas. So that's what you can do. As a general education teacher or special ed, if you want to help, as a modification, provide a study guide, highlight important ideas. That's just one thing. Here's a list of a bunch of them. Some typical classroom accommodations and modifications: additional time during testing, allowing breaks, preferential seating, providing calculators, word banks, reducing answer choices, allowing work to be turned in late, open note testing. These are all ways you can help the special needs student, achieve success. So here's some guidelines. Okay, guidelines for teaching in an inclusion classroom. Both the general education and special education teachers work together, and this isn't always the case. Okay, but I'm focusing on this one here. They must share the responsibility of teaching all students. I hate when it's the general education teacher goes, "Oh, these are my students," and the special education teacher goes, "These are my students." The students in the classroom belong to both teachers. Okay, it's important that both teachers are on the same page, and be careful not to step on each other's toes. I've been in this environment a lot, and that was one of the biggest obstacles. School administrators have the responsibility to ensure that the proper resources make their way to the classroom. Okay, that's what they have to do. Appropriate resources can make a difference to a student in need. Okay, that's securing books, securing it's not just books too. Sometimes these students need have health issues and things like that. Proper wheelchairs, seating, making it where that the student's able to go through the hallways if they have some sort of a physical disability, and they don't have to, maybe they can leave the classroom a little bit earlier. Things like that. Providing software that they can use at home. This is where the school needs to come and do their part. The amount of inclusion should be determined by the student's ability to handle the inclusion setting. So that's usually from the IEP team. They determine if the child's ready. That's kind of goes to mainstreaming. Will they be successful in the inclusion classroom? Special needs inclusion students receive a continuum of services. Okay, services are provided in a flexible manner. So when they're in the classroom, it doesn't it shouldn't just be a rigid thing, because we're always learning, and the child's always going to be improving. So for example, there's going to be good days for pull out instruction, and there's going to be bad days. It's flexible. If a special ed student is in gym, a general education gym classroom, and Well, most of them are anyway, but like, the reading specialist shouldn't just constantly pull the student out of gym all the time. It should be a little bit more flexible where, you can pull them out of different classes. Time of day plays an important factor. So we're talking about flexibility, right? So, the time of day for services, maybe early in the morning if the student struggles in reading. Maybe that's not the best time to provide services to the student because the student's really tired or the student's always late and then that student misses reading instruction. Maybe in the middle of the day is a good time. So a lot of this comes with the child study team has to figure this out. Co-teaching. All right, so there's a lot of different ways you can co-teach. You can do team teaching, one teach, one support, alternative teaching, parallel teaching, stations teaching. Okay, these are different. Teaching is a partnership. Okay, co-teaching is a partnership here. And here is a video on co-teaching models and collaboration. Okay, the 5 different models. I'm going to skip this as well. It goes in detail on all of these. Okay, so special education and general education teachers, they have to work together. It's a partnership. Lynn Cook provided these models and this one here. And the first model is team teaching. Instruction and planning is equally shared. That's the best one. It's recommended for co-teaching. One teach, one support. The support teacher circulates the room and assists a student with questions, and the lead teacher handles instruction, lectures, discipline, etc., etc. Alternative teaching. One teacher works with a large group, and the other teacher pulls out the smaller group, usually to review different content. So that's alternative. And parallel is kind of cool. The class is split into 2 groups with each teacher in charge of their own group. So it's the same, they just kind of divide the class in half, and the teacher goes, I'm going to teach this group, you teach that group, and they're teaching the same lesson. And so sort of reduces the student to teacher ratio. And again, right, the same content. So let me just go back real quick to go over this. Team teaching, that's the best one. They both share same responsibilities. At least I think so. One teach, one support, right? The lead teacher does instruction, lectures, discipline, and the support teacher just kind of circulates and helps with any questions. That actually is very common. Alternative is kind of like a pull-out, right? The teacher pulls out a small group and works with themselves. A station teaching is fun. You can set up different stations. One teacher takes this station, another teacher takes another station, and you could have just a station kind of on its own, maybe where students watch videos. But there's different ways to attack that model. Collaboration is key for the inclusion classroom. If a general education teacher is working with a special education teacher, they're going to have to work together. They're going to have to collaborate. So collaboration is necessary. Okay. Teachers need the time to co-plan and plan together. That's a big issue with schools. Many schools don't allow for that. And time's an issue because teachers are so busy, but I wish they could. So co-planning includes time for them to lesson plan together, design resources, quizzes, discuss classroom activity. So when the general education teacher and the special education can do that and confer and talk, all students benefit and the teachers benefit. But again, schools usually don't provide that time. Again, another video here, just a short video on collaboration. PLCs are a great way to foster a culture of collaboration among teachers. PLC stands for Professional Learning Communities, where teachers can share ideas. Teachers will also have to collaborate with related services personnel, and related services include speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy. So, professional learning communities, everybody gets together, they discuss ideas. I think it's great for collaboration, especially you can do like grade level and if it's possible to bring in speech and occupational therapists and things like that. And PLCs kind of put everybody on the same goal towards student success, which brings people together. Schools may send teachers out for inclusion classroom related professional development. I've been sent to one and it was a great experience. Feel free to use this presentation if you want to take parts of if you want to download it or whatever. I have it up here. And here we're coming to the end here, right? So this is the review of everything. All right, so we went over the beliefs. Just to review this real quick. So the inclusion movement is beliefs that special needs students deserve to be with non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible. And there are a lot of benefits when special needs students are working with general education students, they get better self-esteem. IEP outcomes are better. They communicate better. If you take a look at the history here, we've come a long way with the inclusion movement. Years ago, special needs students didn't have any education. And look how far we've come. And mainstreaming is about students being ready to enter the general. Special needs students have to be ready to enter the general education classroom. You don't want to just put these, just because a student is able to go in a general education classroom doesn't mean they should, because you don't want to put that student there and then maybe they fail. Maybe you want to do instead partial inclusion. Maybe start slow. Just put them, put the student in maybe one or two general education classrooms, and then from there build. And there's a lot of different instruction. I mentioned varying presentation is important when special needs students are in the gen ed classroom. They should have individual goals. You might have to reteach, pre-teach. Again, provide them supplementary materials, and modifications and accommodations are key in helping the special education student achieve instruction, achieve success. Modifications and accommodations really help for instruction. And when these students are in the general education classroom, and when special needs students are mainstreamed and really really getting involved in the school, make sure that we're providing them resources. We're flexible. Inclusion, like we said, it could be partial, full inclusion, and the teachers need to really get on the same page with co-teaching. That's very important. That they pick one, and they kind of have an idea of co-teaching and what it is. I mentioned sending them out for PD. I went out for a PD, and I learned a lot. And collaboration. Everybody has to work together. Okay. So, all right. I want to say thank you for your time. So I'm more excited. Thank you for your time. I'll see you at the next. See you at the next training, and have a nice day.